Some of you have come long distances from Oakland, Berkeley, other time zones. I had a talk to introduce our speaker. Half of the talk was describing kind of the overall theme of the conference, which Jane Wales has taken away from me. The other half was the biography of our speaker, which is in the program. So I find this wonderfully liberating. I will just tell you two stories about Jim Wolfensohn, who I had not met until this evening, two personal stories. One inspirational, the other a disappointment, I have to say. I'll start with the disappointment, which is the personal one, which is sometimes when I am in Washington, I play chamber music with friends, and I knew, this is not in the biography, by the way, that Mr. Wolfensohn is an accomplished cellist, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to invite him to join our group one of these visits. I got as far as the secretary. I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have been able to get that far if it weren't the Hewlett Foundation name, I think. And she said, well, actually, he hasn't practiced for a while, but give him some time. So this is the disappointment with some hope for the future. The inspirational part is, I guess, personal and institutional as well. At the Hewlett Foundation, we have begun exploring some work which I think will become an actual program of ours, a significant program in 2005 on global development. If we had done this 10 years ago, I think we would not have thought of the World Bank as a resource in thinking about these issues, although of course it's been in the business for some time. I think that since Jim Wolfensohn has been there, the World Bank's commitment, but also its actual activities in dealing with global poverty have really transformed the institution. And as we develop this program, we look to the World Bank and to the work that he and his colleagues have done as much as we look to anybody else. And with that introduction, I give you this evening's speech.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction, and if you reissue the invitation to play chamber music with you at next year's conference, perhaps we could really get it started in a harmonious way. Let me first of all say how grateful I am to Jane Wales and to you, Paul, and to John for the invitation to join you. This is something that I've wanted to do for quite some time, and it is a pleasure finally to be here and to be able to participate with you in the discussion on poverty, and also to do it in the presence of my predecessor, Tom Clawson, who is a favorite son of California and a great leader of the bank, and I pay tribute to him for the contribution that he did. I should tell you that I didn't feel so warmly about Tom Clawson when he was appointed, because I don't know whether Tom knows this, I was on the list to become president of the World Bank. And for some weeks before Tom's appointment, I had my pajamas inscribed with President World Bank, and I was living the life of the president of the World Bank in my head, and my wife was calling me Mr. President each night, and I went to bed. And then Tom Clawson gets the job, and I was forced to form my own investment bank, which turned out not to be so bad, and allowed me to do some of the things that I would have liked to do. I have been told, I should tell you, when I came into the room by the gentleman standing in front of me, just to put me at perfect ease, that I had 15 minutes, and that at 10 minutes a placard would go up to say I had 5 minutes left. And so if I look nervously down at him, you'll understand that I have been put at ease, but I'm scared to death about this placard. He also told me that if I speak too long, something dreadful will happen behind me. And so let me get immediately into the subject, which is partnership and which is the issue of poverty. And when I looked at the list of speakers and the subjects that are to be covered, it's quite difficult in the space of the now 13 minutes that I have left to cover the broad range of subjects which is going to be dealt with here. And as I look at Mr. Conway and Mr. Gregorian, who are models of mine, particularly, if I may say so, Mr. Gregorian, because I've known him longer, I feel distressed. I don't have the beard that he has. I don't have the sense of gravitas that he has. I haven't been provost of a university and librarian of New York and all the things that he does, and I don't have the money he has running Carnegie Foundation. So I am totally nervous at this moment. But I do want you to know that I care a lot about poverty. And so what I thought I would do, instead of dealing with the particulars of the partnership issue that are going to be dealt with so effectively by many colleagues in this room, is to try and set the stage as to why we are interested in poverty and why I think you should be interested in poverty, into which I hope the issue of partnership will become clear. Firstly, the role of our bank, the role of our institution, is to address the question of poverty, and to address it within the context of the millennial goals as a most visible objective, which is to halve poverty by the year 2015, halve the percentage of poverty in the world. And that is a daunting task. And you might ask, why is this important? Well, let's get a few statistics out of the way that are relevant. First and foremost, we have 2.8 billion people in the planet that live under $2 a day. And we have 1,200,000,000 living under $1 a day. They're interesting statistics, but they're also human dramas when you get into seeing the people and working with the people that suffer in this way. But these are not people that need charity. They're people that need opportunity and that need a chance. This is not a group of people that you need to pity. It's a group of people that need to be unlocked because they're a resource. They're not a burden. And that I've discovered in the nearly 9 years I've been in our institution. The second thing is that you should understand that in the demographics of our planet, we have 5 billion people living in developing countries. 5 billion out of the 6 billion people on our planet. The 1 billion, that includes most of the people in this room, are fortunate to live in the wealthy countries, and we have 80% of the assets, and the 5 billion have 20% of the assets. And within those countries, there are huge differences between rich and poor in terms of the distribution of resources. Now that too would be an interesting statistic just at the statistical level, except that again it translates into the impact on people. And we have been saying for a long time in our institution, and Tom Clausen said it too, that these two worlds of the rich and the poor are really not two worlds. They're really linked in very many ways. And if you ever doubted the linkage between the rich and the poor, at least in my estimation, on September the 11th, the image of the World Trade Center coming down was the image to me of the wall collapsing, the imaginary wall collapsing. Because we're linked in so many ways by trade, by finance, by the environment in which we live, by crime, by migration, by health, by drugs, by many of the subjects that you're going to be addressing in your partnership sessions about what it is you look at in terms of poverty. And we're also linked by terror, a subject which is prominent in the political mandate of our times and prominent in our own country. And what we believe, frankly, is that poverty somewhere is now poverty everywhere. That terror somewhere is terror everywhere. That crime somewhere is crime everywhere. That health problems somewhere are health problems everywhere. We feel it whether it's a new strain of flu or infection as a result of poultry in Asia. We feel it in relation to AIDS. We feel it in relation to communicable diseases. And we feel it in migration, and we feel it in so many ways. So the first thing to establish is that although there is imbalance in terms of assets, there is unity in terms of the planet in which we live. And that is important for this conference, because we're looking at this conference at the issue of poverty and the issue of disposition of resources on a global basis. So the first thing I put to you is that this is not a charitable activity. This is an activity in terms of an integrated planet of which you're part, of which we're all part. And so when you think of building partnerships, as you are in this conference, and borderless giving, it is wholly consistent with at least my analysis and our analysis of the nature of the planet in which we're operating. And as I came in and met a leading woman in terms of philanthropy and her daughter, who are going to speak to you during the course of this event, that to me symbolized also what I have in my own family, which is what of the next generation? What is it that those of you of my generation need to be thinking about in relation to the next generation? And what you need to be thinking about, and what I'm thinking about in my own life, is the world of 2030, 25 years from now, which is a world not of 6 billion, but of 8 billion, of whom 7 billion will be in developing countries. The rich world will grow maybe 50 million people. Europe will be smaller. Our country, the United States, is likely to be 40 million larger, but significantly because of immigration. And indeed, the issue of migration in terms of Europe and other countries becomes a central issue, as does the issue of development itself. I've just come back from my own country, Australia, where I was born. And I asked friends down there, what about Australia in 2030? And they said, we'll grow from 19.5 billion to maybe 22 billion. And I said, what else? And they said, well, 35% of the people will be over the age of 65. I said, has it occurred to you that in Indonesia, which is a few hours away, there'll be 60 million more people? And a little bit to the north, there'll be 300 million more people in China. I think it started a debate which has continued since I was there. And I probably shouldn't go back under the Howard government, but it is the sort of thing that one needs to think of as one thinks of demographics, and again, the changing balance in our planet. And then you need to think of what is the composition of our planet as it is today. 2.8 billion people living under the age of 25. 1.5 billion under the age of 15. And what John and his company are doing is trying to address the needs of many of these young people. Because in the next 25 to 30 years, there'll be more than 2 billion new young people coming along. And you have to ask yourself, if we cannot deal with the question of hope and expectations of young people, how can you have stability on the planet? Think of your own children. Think of your own children bereft of any resources, never having had a job, not being able to get a job, and barely educated. You don't have to be Muslim to think that you'd go out and blow someone up. I said to my friends in Israel the other day, if young Jews were like this, they'd probably also go out and blow someone up. Young Muslims, young Christians, young anything. It is a question of expectation and hope that we need to deal with. And it's not a question just of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism can lead people in wrong directions. But the fundamental issue is hope and opportunity. The fundamental question that we need to give people is a chance. We've done a study of 60,000 poor people in the bank in 60 different countries. And not surprisingly, they're like all of us. What do they want? They want freedom. They want voice. They want a chance for their kids. The women don't want to be beaten up, which all too frequently they are. They want an opportunity. They don't want charity. They want a chance, much like any of us, for ourselves and for our families. So there's nothing different about poor people. I've now been to 115 countries. And I've met with communities and slums and villages, and the best people you meet are in slums and villages and in country environments. And you'd be proud to have them as your friends, and you'd be proud to have them as models. But if they don't get an opportunity, in the numbers in which they operate, they become a place in which instability flourishes and where people of ill will can gain influence. And so whether you think of your activities as being morally right, equitably sound, or the right thing to do, you can also think of this as the real question of stability. All too frequently, we look at the question of stability and peace in terms of military expenditures, and I say this in front of the former Secretary Bill Perry. But I have to say from my own side, and I believe he probably would agree, that spending, as we did in 1999, $800 billion in total on military expenditures, and probably closer to $900 billion plus now, for security, to combat terrorism. If we don't deal with the fundamental issues of poverty, we could spend $2 trillion. And Tony Lake knows a lot about this, and I haven't been in the positions that Bill and Tony have. But just from my own experience, I believe that the issue that we need to face, and that this community needs to face, is the issue that providing people with hope, providing people with a dream, and for our country providing the moral leadership and the expression of what America stands for, is maybe the most effective way to bring about stability and peace and to combat terror. I'm not making the case just based on terrorism, but I'm trying to adjust the argument to the existing issue of fighting terror. How can we spend nearly $1 trillion a year on military expenditure? How can we protect our markets for $300 to $350 billion in agricultural subsidies and spend $50 billion on development assistance and expect balance in our planet? It makes no sense. Now, what about the philanthropic community? There's a need for partnership, because it can't be done by governments alone, nor should it be. Dealing with the question of poverty in countries requires a partnership between the government of those countries, civil society, the private sector, and also the faiths which play a significant role in terms of development and which people don't talk about very much because of fear of the intervention of the issue of faiths. But in Africa, 50% of education and 50% of health is provided by faith-based institutions. In my own institution, I tried to get a dialogue going of development institutions with faith-based institutions, and I was voted down 24 to nothing. We did it anyway. We've had 3 meetings, which the Archbishop of Canterbury and I and a few others did, and it's been a remarkable success. And now I think a lot of people think that it maybe wasn't such a stupid idea. But there is a need for partnership for all the players. And we've had enormous success and enormous gratification over many years in building partnerships The one I first came to know of was the CGIAR partnership in agriculture with the Rockefeller Foundation, on whose board I had the pleasure of serving for a decade. But there have been many others, and without naming the foundations for fear of not naming some, in the area of medicine, in the area of agriculture, in the area of human development, all of which I'm sure will be referred to in the meetings that you're having. And these individual expressions of partnership are surely critical and a very important part of the meetings in the next 2 days. But for me, if I can put it out there, the most significant partnership that we could have would be to impact our government and other governments on the importance of the issue of poverty as an instrument that needs to be fought against to bring about stability and peace. We have to get away from the notion that peace and terror, peace as something to be sought, terror as something to be beaten down, can be achieved or beaten without addressing the question of poverty and human development. Our country must be seen not as the policeman, but it needs to be seen as a source of inspiration and love. Our country needs to be seen as a country which stands for equity, which stands for social justice, which stands for hope, and which stands for the things that made our country great. That is the theme that this conference should be built on. And we must unite in terms of influencing governments, our own and others, to put at the head of the list the human dimension of development as distinct from the responsive activity of military expenditure and barriers. If there's a partnership that we should have, it is the partnership to change the balance in our approach. And advocacy for that is essential. Within that framework, we can have the individual discussions that are so important and so necessary within the context of this conference. But without the change of balance, we'll be talking to each other. And talking to each other is not going to achieve what we're looking for. So I urge you to be the real voice, a voice that can impact our Millennium Challenge account, a voice that can impact our own government, a voice that can give priority to humanity and hope against despair and military expenditure. That, for me, is the partnership that we should be seeking. And that's the thought, even though I've only got 1 minute left, as I see, that's the thought I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wolfensohn is willing to take a few questions if there are some. And a roving microphone.
I promise you, he said I've only got another 5 minutes left. Is that right? I'm so aware that you have to get home. No questions? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to, sorry, I'm Barbara Briggs-Letson with the J-Tree 2 Foundation. Thank you for what you just said. Secondly, I would like to know how you see land distribution in the conundrum that you have presented to us tonight.
Well, I think you had, if I read correctly, Hernando de Soto last year at your meeting, and I agree significantly with what he says in terms of land ownership and the value created by recognition of land rights. I don't think it's the whole story, but I think redistribution of land in an equitable way is a very important component in development. I don't think it is Zimbabwe. I think that that is land distribution gone mad. But I do think that in many countries there are huge tracts of government land that can be made available for the productive use to individuals. And I believe that when they are given title, from all the experience that we have, production increases, investment increases, and you have significant advances in terms of productivity. I need only to mention to you China, where I've seen it also in Russia. So I think the issue of land distribution is a crucial issue, but I don't think there is a single solution to the land distribution question. You need to look at culture, you need to look at the nature of governance, you need to look at the history, you need to look at the questions of ownership. It is a complicated issue. But I do believe that the ability to have land, the ability to have a right to where you live, as a single instrument in the development process is an extremely important one, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of land ownership and land distribution. Yes, sir. I think there's one there, and then we'll come to you. Sorry. He's got the speaker.
David Brewer in Poverty Foundation. Like you, I once had the president of World Bank on my to-do list. I gave it up a long time ago, and I'm happy. And I'm curious if you have a strategy of how to reposition the World Bank to regain the confidence of Americans and the world as a major player.
Well, the answer is I hope I've had that strategy for 9 years. And I think the bank has been both a misunderstood institution and an institution, like all institutions, that have made mistakes and needs to change. And the one thing I do believe about the institution now, building on the contribution of previous presidents, including Tom, is that we have become a more humane and a more integrated institution in the global scene. We are led by the countries themselves. Projects which we do are owned in the countries. We are open to partnerships of all sorts. We have an approach to development which is comprehensive, and we're ready to listen and learn. The gentleman on your right, Shams Zulani, represents His Highness the Aga Khan in the Aga Khan Foundation. Nice to see you. If we hadn't learned from the Aga Khan Foundation, we would have made a hell of a lot of mistakes in Central Asia. We probably still made some, but being willing to listen to institutions like the Aga Khan Foundation has made a big difference to us. And you need to be open in terms of your willingness to change. And I believe that our institution has done that now for a number of years. What I find distressing is that civil society has not changed a lot of its views of us. And when I go into a room to speak, I can pick, when I see the people between the age of 40 and 60, from their faces, that they have formed a view of us some years ago, which will never be changed. And I see them as I smile at them, and they look sternly at me. And I see them when I tell a joke, and they don't smile. I know exactly who they are. I'm happy to say you're smiling. But if you hadn't been, I would have picked you. And so it is a tough fight. But it's one that's worth doing, and I can tell you that there is a significant change in our relationship with civil society within countries, We now have 2,500 people in the field that are working in situ. We are much more connected than we ever were. And it takes time to change a culture in an organization. I think somewhere between 5 and 10 years, and I think we're well advanced on that. And it probably takes an equal time to change the perceptions, maybe longer. And these people of 40 to 60 influence the new generation of kids at universities. And so there is a certain carryover, but measuring by the number of people that want to come work for us, I think that that is changing also. We have 11,000 people in our institution who are as fantastic a group of people as you could ever meet, from 140 different nationalities, devoted, working their tails off, and waking up every day thinking not how they can screw up the world, but how they can make a difference. And in the end, that'll be recognized. Just the sheer quality and the effort of our people is going to make the difference. Beyond that, there's not, you can't put ads in the paper and say, you know, change your view of the bank. But I think reality will come through, and I see already significant changes in the way the process is working. I might not have been asked here 7 or 8 or 10 years ago. And look at this, people are smiling.
One of the new realities in the world is the role of the U.S. military. And as a country, we, as you have pointed out, we're willing to invest in that. And strangely enough, if you meet them on the ground, they view their role not only as security, but also as development. And my question would be, how do you at the World Bank, and how do we as in foundations, and more importantly, how do NGOs around the world, how do we deal with that phenomenon? How do we both capitalize on the fact that they've got a lot of manpower and, at least from our country, a lot of money, which we won't put into development, but which they can spend on development if they choose. How do we capitalize on it, and how do we deal with the side effects that are part of it?
I have, in my personal experience, the highest possible regard for the American military in developing countries. I've worked with them in Bosnia, Kosovo. I've seen them in Afghanistan. I've seen them in Iraq. And a more constructive group of people broadly, you can't meet. They're ready to do a lot. Secretary Perry, I think, would know that better than I, but the people in the armed forces, I think, are really remarkable in their identification with the local community, in my experience. And the problem that I find is that if it's the only thing which represents the United States, for many people overseas, the sight of military has all sorts of emotional reactions. You only have to think of the history of many of the countries in which we're operating. So I am not critical of the military per se, but I am expressing the hope that the image is not left to be the image just of good military. As I said before, I think our country needs to reestablish that sense of moral leadership, that sense of vision, that sense of hope that comes from private sector and from civil society, and can come from governments as well. And that's a tough sell at the moment. I've been speaking to newspapers and television and things lately, and it's quite hard to encourage people to increase development assistance and to open markets, because they say we're losing jobs, we've got problems in our own country, the economy's not doing very well, the budget deficit is considerable, and something's got to be cut, so you cut development. I may be perceived as being partisan because I'm in a job that has to do with development, But I say to you honestly that my belief is that if we were to spend globally another 50 billion a year on development to establish for financially sound investments and for development activities an image of our country caring about people, caring about ideals, caring about spirituality, caring about the meaning of human life, which is not difficult for us because we all feel that way. But if we could convey it externally, the image of our country would be different today. Now that's what I believe. And it pains me to think that the image of this country as a non-generous country and as a military power is the predominant image that we have today. When I know that that is not the self-image of most of the people in this country who feel generous, who are generous, but it's not getting out there. And as someone who adopted citizenship in this country and know the strengths of this country, I think it's painful. But may I say that I think a huge amount can be done by private sector philanthropy and by individual philanthropy. A vast amount of foreign aid, we estimate that up to $10 billion extra of foreign aid is coming through private sources, through philanthropic and other sources globally. And that is delivered, I mean, yesterday I spent 4 hours at CARE in Atlanta. They have a budget, they have 12,000 people. They have 700 people now in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They showed me the monument to the 200 people whose lives have been lost in CARE. We've lost one life in Iraq and 3 people badly injured. So there is courage, there's vision, and there's constructive action by many philanthropies. And I think that that is something which is crucial to the projection of our image, but more importantly, crucial to the substance of bringing about equity on our planet. And what country more than the United States should be at the lead in terms of that, and be perceived to be in the lead in terms of that? But what country in the world now is least perceived to be that? Unfortunately, in so many ways, is our own country. And as a loyal citizen, I must say that I find that very disappointing. And it's not that President Bush has not made actions. He has increased domestic development assistance, nominated $5 billion more over 3 years, which is more than happened in the last administration. And he's talked about $15 billion over 5 years in AIDS assistance. But it hasn't come through yet. And it is not just the signing of checks. It is the projection of the values of our country. And it's this that I think this group can play a major role in. Thank you very much.